There are places in the Half-Life universe defined by war, by science, by the relentless machinery of alien conquest. And then there is Ravenholm, a place defined by something quieter and somehow far more devastating. Not a battlefield, not a facility, just a town. A small, forgotten mining town tucked somewhere in Eastern Europe, surrounded by hills, built from brick and concrete and the modest ambitions of ordinary people who simply wanted to live their lives away from the chaos consuming the rest of the world. For a brief window of time, they almost managed it. To understand what Ravenholm became, you first have to understand what it was and what the world around it had turned into. When the Combine conquered Earth in 7 hours, civilization didn't end all at once. It collapsed unevenly. Cities fell into occupation. Checkpoints appeared overnight. The massive urban sprawl of places like City 17 became controlled environments, monitored, suppressed, suffocated under the weight of Combine authority. Citizens were registered, processed, and kept under a surveillance so total that resistance felt not just dangerous, but impossible. And so people ran. Not everyone stayed in the cities and learned to keep their heads down. Some slipped through the cracks, through tunnels and back roads and forgotten routes that the Combine's maps hadn't yet accounted for. They were looking for somewhere off the grid, somewhere that, for whatever reason, the occupying empire hadn't noticed yet. Ravenholm, at some point after the Combine invasion, became exactly that, a haven for human citizens fleeing from City 17, used as a rallying point for the local resistance. Refugees arrived in small groups, former neighbors, strangers, survivors, people who had lost nearly everything and were trying to hold on to what little remained. They settled into the existing structures of the mining town, barricaded what needed barricading, and began building something that felt, however fragile, like a community. The town served as an outpost for the resistance against the Combine occupation. It wasn't a military base, it wasn't an armory or a command center. It was something more human than that, a place where people who refused to surrender could wake up in the morning without a Combine scanner hovering outside their window. In the context of the world Half-Life 2 depicts, that alone was worth everything. For a time, Ravenholm remained hidden. The Combine, for all their power, were not omniscient. The town's small size, its remote location, its quiet nature, all of it kept it beneath the threshold of detection. The people there knew how lucky they were. They knew the arrangement was fragile, and they continued living anyway, because what else could they do? The town remained hidden from the Combine for some time, however, it was eventually discovered. What followed was not a battle. There was no warning, no ultimatum, no soldiers marching through the streets. The Combine's response to Ravenholm wasn't an invasion, it was something colder and more deliberate than that. It was a demonstration. The Combine bombarded the town with artillery shells containing headcrabs, alien parasites, which attack organisms and turn them into zombies. The shells came from beyond the horizon, arcing through the sky before splitting open on impact and releasing their payload across the rooftops and streets of the settlement. There was no defense against it. No countermeasure, no escape route fast enough, no wall thick enough. The people of Ravenholm, the refugees who had come there seeking safety, the resistors who had chosen defiance over surrender, had no idea what was happening until it was already done. The headcrabs moved quickly. They latched onto hosts and hijacked their nervous systems, overriding everything the person had been. Memories, fear, love, all of it, subordinated to the parasite's basic compulsion to hunt and spread. What had been a community of survivors became, in the span of a single terrible night, something unrecognizable. The zombified residents moved through the same streets they had once walked freely, through the same homes where they had once slept and eaten and hoped, but they were no longer themselves. The sounds that the zombies make when played backwards reveal them to be screaming, "Oh God, help me, please help me." These lost souls may be in agony, or they may be remembering the agony of their initial possession. The bodies were still there. Something of the person might even still have been inside, but there was nothing anyone could do for them now. The massacre resulted in the annihilation of the settlement, and it was consequently abandoned. The resistance pulled back. There was no reclaiming Ravenholm, not from the outside. Whatever it had been, whatever it had meant to the people who had lived there, was over. The Combine had made their point with terrifying efficiency. This was what defiance cost. This was the price of hiding. The world quietly closed the door on Ravenholm and moved on. Nobody spoke about it if they could avoid it. But one person stayed. Father Grigori, a mysterious priestly figure, remained behind as the sole surviving resident of Ravenholm. Why he didn't leave with the others is never fully explained. Perhaps he arrived too late to flee. Perhaps he made a choice that others wouldn't understand. Whatever the reason, when the last resistance members evacuated and the town fell into silence, Grigori was still there alone in a place that had become something between a graveyard and a nightmare. He could have despaired. He could have simply given up, barricaded himself in some room, and waited for the end. Instead, he did something stranger and more remarkable. He adapted. Father Grigori set up many traps and structures in order to dispose of zombies more efficiently. The traps were engineered so that zombies could randomly stumble into them, but they could be easily circumvented by normal humans. In addition to traps, Grigori separated Ravenholm into districts using wooden barricades, so zombies could be found in a more organized manner. Think about what that required. Not just the physical labor of building and maintaining elaborate mechanisms across an entire abandoned town, the pulleys, the hanging cars rigged to drop, the spinning saw blades suspended between buildings, but the mental architecture it took to keep going at all. Grigori organized Ravenholm the way a shepherd might organize a flock. He moved through his dead town with purpose, tending to it, maintaining it, keeping it functional in the only way it could still be functional. He'd established a darkly pastoral relationship with the zombies. He was their shepherd. They were his flock. He offered salvation by exercising them, a process that seemed to begin with his shotgun and end with his elaborate traps. He spoke of them in the language of his faith, lost souls requiring deliverance rather than simply monsters to be destroyed. Whether this framing was spiritual sincerity or the psychological mechanism that allowed him to keep living in such a place, it's impossible to say. Perhaps both were true at once. A man alone in the ruins of something that had briefly meant hope, performing last rites for people he may have known every single day with no end in sight. He had not given up on Ravenholm. He was its last caretaker, its last witness. The town remained a forbidden, unspoken place, confirmed by a sign on the ground bearing the name Ravenholm, its creepiness amplified by the darkness of the perpetual night that seemed to hang over it. The resistance base of Black Mesa East was connected to it by tunnel, a passage that still existed, still technically usable, but that nobody wanted to use. It was the kind of route that appeared on no plans and was mentioned in no briefings. Alex Vance, when it came up at all, shut the conversation down with 4 words that carried the weight of everything that had happened there. We don't go there anymore. That was all anyone needed to know. The phrase wasn't a warning so much as a mourning, an acknowledgement that whatever Ravenholm had represented, it was gone. And revisiting it served no purpose except to remind you of what the Combine was capable of. Then the Combine attacked Black Mesa East. Gordon Freeman, cut off from the others by a collapsed ceiling, was forced to escape down the tunnel into Ravenholm, the place that Alex didn't want to talk about, showing obvious discomfort at the thought. He had no other way out. The tunnel was the only passage left open, and so Gordon Freeman went to Ravenholm. What he found was both worse and stranger than anything a simple warning could have prepared him for. The traditional European architecture, which elsewhere in the game offered a sense of grim familiarity, became claustrophobic here. Where the game had previously offered expansive coastline and open road, here everything closed in brick on all sides. Narrow alleys, buildings leaning inward, darkness everywhere. The streets were full of what the people of this town had become. Headcrab hosts moved through the spaces they had once lived in, through the same roads and buildings, now stripped of everything that had made those spaces meaningful. And scattered throughout this landscape were Grigori's traps, hanging cars ready to drop, spinning blades poised between walls, explosive arrangements that revealed a mind still deeply, stubbornly at work amid all of it. And then Grigori appeared, calling down from above, armed and alive and utterly himself. He guided Gordon through the maze of the town he knew better than anyone. through districts and barricades and the machinery of his lonely war. He gave Gordon a shotgun, the most practical gift he could offer, and moved through Ravenholm alongside him, not physically at his side, but present, watching, calling out, present in the way that someone becomes present when they know every inch of the space around them. Together, in their strange way, they moved toward the old mine, the passage that would take Gordon back toward the road to City 17. At the cemetery, the story of Ravenholm reached its final moment. Freeman and Grigori made their way to an old mine, which had a path that led back to City 17. But Grigori stayed behind to fight the zombies, continuing to do so until the crypt behind him burst open, releasing more of his flock. He continued shooting until he ran through blazing fire into the crypt. Gordon went through the mine. Grigori stayed in the fire. Whether he survived what came next is one of the Half-Life universe's many unanswered questions. The image of him disappearing into the flames surrounded by the dead he had been tending for years, still fighting, still moving forward, is the last thing anyone saw of him. It was, in its way, exactly the ending the place deserved. Not a rescue, not a clean exit, a man consumed by the thing he had committed himself to, vanishing into it completely. Ravenholm didn't get a liberation. Nobody came back for it. The tunnels were sealed. The traps, without anyone to maintain them, would eventually fail. The zombies would drift and rot. The town itself would continue to decay quietly in whatever pocket of Eastern Europe it occupied, a place the Combine had turned into an example, and which had then exceeded the terms of the lesson by producing, in the darkness, something the Combine had not intended. Not resistance, not hope, exactly, but endurance. A single person who had looked at the worst possible outcome and decided, for reasons entirely his own, to keep going anyway. This is what happens if the Combine wins. That's what Ravenholm represents in the fabric of the Half-Life universe. It's not a warning about alien biology or military capability. It's a warning about what happens to ordinary people, people who just wanted somewhere safe when power decides to make an example of them. The shells didn't fall on a military target, they fell on a town. And yet, in the ruins of that town, in the dark and the silence and the long absence of any rescue, something persisted. Not victory, not justice. Just a man with a shotgun and a faith battered almost beyond recognition, doing the only thing left to do, caring for the lost in the only way he still could. That's the full story of Ravenholm. A mining town that became a refuge that became a target that became a ghost town, and a ghost town that became, in the end, a testament to something the Combine never quite managed to extinguish: the will to remain. And that was the story of Ravenholm. If you enjoyed this Half-Life lore breakdown, make sure to like the video and subscribe. See you in the next one.